Today I'd like to talk to you about scope mounting basics. Now, this isn't a complete training course on how to mount every kind of rifle scope or handgun scope that you can find, but I think if I help to show you the principle of what's going on here and a few basic tools, then it might encourage you to go ahead and try it yourself. Right off the bat, I think having a secure way to hold the rifle is really important. I use this Tipton Best Gun Vise. It's something similar. They're very affordable, $35 to $100, but it gives you a good secure place to hold the rifle, which is important. This is a torque wrench that measures in inch-pounds, and it's actually really important how tight you do the mounts and the ring screws, because most people over-torque them, and you can actually do a lot of damage to the scope. So you can, maybe 2 or 3 of your shooting buddies, pool your money and buy one of these. They're anywhere from $40, say, upwards of about $150. A good set of hex wrenches, maybe even metric if you're dealing with some European guns or European scopes. That's very important. And something that's virtually just indispensable is a comprehensive screwdriver kit like this one from Wheeler Engineering. It's got just about every possible screwdriver bit, hex head, torque wrench, and including specialty ones for very specific jobs with certain guns. You can do it with a screwdriver or a simple Allen wrench, but having the proper tools certainly makes it more reliable and a little safer, because that way you don't break something. All right, well, let's get to work here. Basically, you want to lock your gun in the vise. This rifle has a base that I've screwed onto the receiver with pre-drilled holes. With these particular mount styles, the scope rings themselves actually clamp to this base. There are some mounting systems that have integral bases. There are some mounting systems that have split bases. And so it really depends on the style of scope and rings and rifle that you're doing. But the principle is the same. And so in this situation, these rings will go onto this base like this. We'll see if they'll cooperate for me here. There we go. And then what you'll do is take the scope, and the scope then sits like that. Now, before we actually mount the scope, what we'll do is secure these screws to the base to make sure that these are rigid. In this situation, we're just screwing these Allen head screws in, but what you want to do is make sure that you're balanced on both sides. There's a screw on either side. These particular mounts have the ability to be adjusted for windage. That way you can make large adjustments to zero your scope using the base, so you don't use up the internal adjustments in the scope. Okay, after we tighten these bottom portion of the rings, we'll go ahead and place the scope in. Now, I had mounted this before, so you can see some faint marks there. So I know roughly where this is going to go. At this point, you might want to go ahead and shoulder the rifle, because you're going to have to maybe slide the scope forward or backwards in order to get the proper eye relief so you can see the entire view through the scope. Okay, now we'll put the rings on. I like to degrease the rings, because if they're slippery, then the scope may slide if you've got a gun that has heavy recoil. This particular one is a .22 Magnum, so it doesn't have a lot of recoil. Now there we go. We've gone ahead and tightened up the base, put the rings on, put the scope on. We've adjusted it for front to back so I have the proper eye relief. And then what we need to do now is actually shoulder it, and then we'll adjust the vertical alignment of the crosshairs. Now, they do make devices that you can put in the muzzle, and leveling devices with a 90-degree angle, and they're very convenient to have. You don't really need them, especially when you're dealing with something that's just, hey, this is going on a .22 rifle, or this is going on my 30-06 deer rifle. The point being, you want to get the crosshairs vertical, and so just you sight through it, you look, you shoulder it, and all you have to do is kind of tweak this back and forth until you think you've got it aligned pretty well. Now at this point, once I'm happy with that, we'll go ahead and torque the screws down using our inch-pound torque wrench. Now, according to this manufacturer's specifications, that it requires the cap screws to be torqued at 20 inch-pounds, which is what I've put on here. And if you've ever used a torque wrench like for a vehicle or a mechanic's torque wrench, it works the same. What you do is, as it tightens the screw, when it reaches the 20 inch-pounds of torque, then the wrench itself will break like that. We'll do it again. This means it won't allow me to tighten any more than 20 inch-pounds. What happens frequently is people tend to crank them down and over-tighten, which at that point can actually distort the scope body. It can put torque into the scope, cause all kinds of problems. Now I'll also do the very same thing to the base. Tighten it in until it's at 20 inch-pounds. Keeping in mind there are many different kinds of mounting systems and many styles of rifles and many styles of scopes. I wasn't trying to teach you how to do this for everything. I mostly wanted you to see what the process is. And it's actually quite simple. And if you have a few basic tools and a little patience and maybe access to the internet if you're running into trouble, you can easily mount a scope on a sporting rifle, do it correctly, and not break anything while you're doing it. Hey, thanks for tuning in another episode. And you know what? Remember those firearm safety rules, and before you start working on a gun, make sure it's always unloaded, make sure it's safe, make sure the muzzle's pointing in a safe direction. I'm Roy Huntington, and thanks for tuning in.